Oh no! There's a financial crisis. Hopefully it won't have been caused by deregulation. Hopefully you won't ultimately end up bailing them out, even if it's tangentially. And hopefully some of the same people that were involved in the 2008 financial crisis won't be involved in this one. Hello there, you 6 million awakening wonders. Thanks for joining us on this voyage towards truth and freedom, a voyage that must be undertaken together, where we must find new unity, where we have to stop throwing rocks at one another and find ways of uniting, coming together in a conciliatory fashion in order to confront centralized power. If you don't subscribe to our channel yet, subscribe to it right now. Turn on the notification bell. That's the only way that the algorithm is going to let you get our daily content. Remember, you can join us every day on Rumble. It's fantastic content there. We talk about it in a much broader way, and of course we're free to say whatever we want to say, and what we want to say is that together we can change the world. That's the message. And one of the ways we can change the world is by observing patterns. For example, if there was a massive bank crash in 2008 that was caused by impropriety, deregulation, prioritizing financial interests above the interests of ordinary people, that literally had some of the same protagonists involved. I'm not suggesting they're major players, but certainly people that worked at Lehman Brothers and Deutsche Bank now work at Silicon Valley Bank. I mean, that's enough of a connection. Deregulation somewhat led to this situation, and it's even possible that people will continue to profit in spite of the fact that on the surface loads of money has gone missing or disappeared. Let's get into this story in detail and see what it can teach us about the way that Washington and Wall Street interact, the symbiosis and revolving door between those two institutions, and how ultimately, even if Joe Biden literally goes on the TV and says taxpayers won't pay for it, if you change the word taxpayer to the word you, that might not be true. Here's a mainstream media news take, MSNBC, you know how those guys love me. Hopefully they won't make this a partisan issue. They'll accept that there are a lot of institutional problems that need to be resolved that neither party are addressing. They won't simply say this is the fault of one of the parties, you know, the one we don't like.
5 years ago, when Republicans were last in control of the House of Representatives, they used the opportunity to roll back banking regulations put into place after the 2008 financial crisis.
Do you see that what they're essentially saying is this is Trump's fault? Here's Trump surrounded by people. Now, of course, Trump's actions do contribute to this current crisis. But is that the entire story? No, because already what he's not told you is that in 2008, Barack Obama bailed out the banks after that financial crisis, meaning that the people that literally caused that problem were given the opportunity to participate in the resolution of that problem, as well as being exculpated from the blame that they ought rightly have shared in. No one went to prison, no one was penalised properly, whereas across America and across the world, ordinary people lost their homes, lost their jobs. Measurable, meaningful consequences. Were there measurable, meaningful consequences for the people that caused it? Let me know in the chat, let me know in the comments. Just in case you don't know everything about the complex and deliberately obtuse world of global finance, here are some facts. On Friday, California regulators shut down the Silicon Valley Bank, SVB, a top lender to venture capital firms and tech startups, and the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation took it over, following a bank run by its customers. I think that means a load of people took out their money at once. On Sunday, regulators closed New York-based Signature Bank. During the pandemic, startups and technology companies enjoyed heady profits, some of which they deposited in the Silicon Valley Bank. Flush with their cash, the bank did what banks do. It kept a fraction on hand and invested the rest, putting a large share into long-dated treasury bonds that promised good returns when interest rates were low. So far, so good. As long as them interest rates remain low, nothing to worry about. We'll be rich. Rich, I tells you. But then, starting a little more than a year ago, the Fed raised interest rates from near zero to over 4.5%. Oh no! As a result, two things happened. The value of the Silicon Valley Bank's holdings of treasury bonds plummeted because newer bonds paid more interest. And as interest rates rose, the gusher of venture capital funding to startup and tech companies slowed because venture funds had to pay more to borrow money. As a result, these startup and tech companies had to withdraw more of their money from the bank to meet their payroll and other expenses. But the bank didn't have enough money on hand. Yesterday, we also spoke to Ryan Grim, who talked about a text message chain where people that were invested in SVB, or at least had their money in SVB, communicated about drawing that money out prior to drawing it out. He believes that that should be investigated, that that's significant information. Why didn't they just draw out their money individually? Why did they do it collectively? Obviously, any responsible reporting on this issue has to include the most recent and significant financial crash, the events of 2008, the political and financial ramifications of which are still being felt right now. Many people argue that Donald Trump is a consequence of Obama's significant decision to bail out the banks in 2008. The way in our country Tony Blair will ever be tethered to his decision to invade Iraq along with George W. Bush, your then president, the fact that Obama didn't say, no, I was voted in on a mandate of change and hope and supporting and standing up for ordinary people from across the political and social spectrum. No way, man, I'm not doing it. Instead, what did he do? He did what you would imagine he'd do. He bailed out the donors and the banks. Then they let people set up new regulations and new rules that were involved in the crisis. The whole thing's exactly what you think. And one of the things that worries me when I learn about politics, and you let me know if you feel the same way, is the things that you often intuit, like, hold on a minute, do they just like bail out their donors and stuff? You're right. Obama endorsed the Wall Street bailout and appointed a team of Clinton-era economic advisors led by Tim Geithner, who became Obama's Treasury Secretary, and Lawrence Summers, who became Director of the National Economic Council. These were the same people who in the 90s had prepared the way for the financial crisis by deregulating Wall Street. So in the 90s, under Clinton, they deregulated Wall Street. They were lobbied, presumably, and they went, oh yeah, all right, we'll let you trade in ways and bundle stuff together and make irresponsible bets and communicate in weird ways. Then the people that made those decisions were present in the Obama administration, so they're not going to go, oh no, you know those ideas that we had then, they were bad ideas, why don't we put the people responsible for that in prison? Oh no, it's me. The Obama administration rescued Wall Street, but at enormous cost to taxpayers and the economy. Estimates of the true cost of the bailout vary from $500 billion to several trillion. I can't conceptualize either of those numbers, can you? They're just abstract at that phase, but I'll tell you what's not abstract, not having an house. The Federal Reserve also provided huge subsidies to the big banks in the form of virtually free loans. But homeowners whose homes were suddenly worth less than the mortgages they owed on them were left hanging in the wind. Many lost their homes. Obama thereby shifted the cost of the bankers' speculative binge onto ordinary Americans, deepening mistrust of a political system increasingly seen as rigged in favour of the rich and powerful. Now in a minute we'll watch Joe Biden's speech and he says things like, you know, capitalism's about risk. If you risk money and you lose money, that's on you. But it ain't on you. And he was obviously vice president when that happened. So what kind of credibility has he got when it comes to talking about financial crisis? None. What we see more and more in these investigations that we undertake here at Stay Free Media is that the system is rigged in order to support institutional, financial and military industrial complex power, and the skill of the political class and media class is managing that information, so it seems like it's either the right thing to do or there's no option but to do it, or the other people would have done it worse and indeed have done it worse in the past. So we just feel trapped in a situation where there's just no options. But the fact is, there are options. Democracy is an option. Independent journalism is an option. Independent thought is an option. Your freedom is an option. But to understand this story a little more deeply and with a little more clarity, we have to look at events in 2015 as well. 8 years before the second largest bank failure in American history occurred, SVB's president personally pressed Congress to reduce scrutiny of his financial institution. So 8 years ago, the president of SVB, Greg Becker, personally himself lobbied for deregulation. Do you know what would make things a lot easier? Go on. Deregulation. What do you mean? Let you do more stuff that you want to do without stopping you from doing it in case it causes a financial crash of some kind? Yeah, that's right. Deregulate us. Let us do what we want to do. I see banking as being like jazz. I like my banking to be free flow. Okay, we'll deregulate you, but there won't be some sort of crisis, will there? I'm promising you, I give you my word, as a banker, there won't be. Is it me? Or does the future feel more insecure and uncertain? Wars, pandemics, lies, trickery. My cats keep having kittens. The last one's personal. For those who are in the United States, there is a way to secure your hard-earned nest egg. American Hartford Gold make it easy to protect your savings and retirement accounts with physical gold and silver. With one phone call, they can have physical gold and silver delivered right to your door, or inside a qualifying retirement account like your IRA or 401k. American Hartford Gold is the highest rated firm in the US with an A+ rating from the BBB and thousands of satisfied clients. Right now, they will give you up to $5,000 of free silver on your first qualifying order. This offer is only for US customers. Call 866 866-505-8315. That's 866-505-8315. Or simply text BRAND to 998899. Get up to $5,000 of silver and protect your future in this crazy, crazy world with some solid precious metals literally made in stars. In 2015, SVB President Greg Becker submitted a statement to a Senate panel pushing legislators to exempt more banks, including his own, obviously, other banks, not mine. I'll do it the hard way, but these other guys, give them a shot, from new regulations passed in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis. So there was a massive crisis. Regulations were introduced. We cannot let that happen again. We've got to stop it. They just wait a little bit of time. Right, a bit of time's passed now. Can you take those regulations off? It's making it impossible for me to make money in unethical and currently illegal ways. 2 months later, SVB added former Obama Treasury Department official Mary Miller to its board. So they do a bit of lobbying, they appoint a former Obama administration member, and what do you know? They suddenly get their way. But don't think there's a revolving door between Washington and Wall Street. Don't think that no matter who you vote for, you're going to get the same sort of results. Don't think that there's no one in Washington standing up for your rights, in even the peripheral figures that do care about your rights, voices in the wilderness that won't have any meaningful impact because institutional power is locked into a set of interests that can't be moved by democracy. They've rigged the game. You know that already. Around that time, federal disclosure records show the bank was lobbying lawmakers on financial regulatory reform and the Systemic Risk Designation Improvement Act of 2015, a bill that was the precursor to legislation ultimately signed by President Donald Trump. The bill was supported in the Senate by 50 Republicans and 17 Democrats, including Virginia Senator Mark Warner, Democrat, for whom Becker held a fundraiser at his Menlo Park, California home in 2016. It's exactly what you think it is, isn't it? They hold fundraisers. If I hold a fundraiser for you, will you deregulate the banking industry so I can make money? The answer is yes. Yes, I will. Oh, before I go, does that not make you feel compromised? You know, that you're not representing the interests of the people that you were elected by to protect them, particularly in the wake of the 2008 crash? Sorry, I stopped listening after we agreed on the fundraiser. 3 years later, after the bank spent more than $500,000 on federal lobbying, lawmakers obliged. That's the phases it took. A bit of lobbying, employ someone, hold a couple of fundraisers, a bit more lobbying, crack on and earn your money. Progressive critics have been quick to blame a deregulatory measure approved 5 years ago by the then Republican-controlled Congress for engendering 2 of the 3 largest bank failures in US history. Yeah, because then what you can do is you can have your cake and eat it. You can still feel like you're on the right side of history and everything and not do anything to change anything. That's what happens again and again and again. In fact, I increasingly believe that is the liberal position. Well, the only things that are available are these bastards or us bastards. And us bastards at least pretend to care about people that are slightly different from us. The GOP, however, wasn't alone in supporting Senator Mike Crapo's, Republican Idaho, Economic Growth, Regulatory Relief and Consumer Protection Act. Even then, it wasn't just Republicans. Barney Frank, architect of the Dodd-Frank banking regulations implemented in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis, played a key role in whitewashing the bipartisan effort to weaken those rules in 2018 after he had received more than $1 million while serving on Signature's board following his departure from Congress. Just take a moment to absorb that. One of the people that came up with the regulations to prevent another crash like 2008 ever happening again, this dude, Barney Frank, got a job on the board of Signature and took $1 million and participated in weakening the regulation that he himself came up. He must have known what that regulation was supposed to be doing it. How are we ever going to stop another financial crash of this nature? Well, I've come up with some regulations. If we carry the one across there, it should work. Okay, thank you, Barney. Great work there. Couple of years. Would you mind removing some of those regulations? It's making it difficult for some of the guys to make money. Oh, yeah. I mean, would there be any problems? I can't think of any problems off the top of my head. I think I was feeling a bit regulatory that day. I was regulating everything. I regulated the cat, regulated the dog. I regulated my shoes so tight that one of my toes fell off. We gotta loosen things up. I'm gonna need a little space, a little room, in particular, to store some of this cash that I've recently acquired that it's none of your business where I got that, as a matter of fact. Does anyone need anything deregulated? Roll up, anything deregulated. Oh, you regulated this a couple of years ago? Yeah, you can deregulate that at the right price. Essentially, Frank downplayed the risks of deregulation while being paid by a bank that stood to gain from it. I don't think there's any problem deregulating. Thank you for my money. With just a few moments of scrutiny, it becomes perfectly clear that whilst you can say that the measures passed by Trump contributed to this problem, it was already a bipartisan bill, therefore culpability must be shared by both parties. It also relates to early events, specifically the events in 2008. Also, a Democrat, Barney Frank, created that regulation, then lobbied for the deregulation while working at one of those banks that gave him money. So you can't have a partisan position on this. Remember, we're not saying that the Republicans and Donald Trump aren't to blame. They are. But also, the Democrats are to blame as well. For example, they've learned that people don't like bailing out banks, so they'll be very careful to say, we won't be bailing out the banks using taxpayer money. We've got this special miracle fund that only comes from bankers. Okay, do you think if we spend a moment pondering that, do you think the banks might look to somehow rescind those losses or mitigate those losses elsewhere? And who do you think the banks will look to get the money from? General Zod? Thanos? Baddies from the outer reaches of space? What do you think it might be? You.
Today, thanks to the quick action of my administration over the past few days, Americans can have confidence that the banking system is safe.
Don't have confidence unless you are the mark in a confidence trick, which of course we all are.
No losses will be borne by the taxpayers. Instead, the money will come from the fees that banks pay into the Deposit Insurance Fund. Investors in the banks will not be protected. They knowingly took a risk, and when the risk didn't pay off, investors lose their money. That's how capitalism works.
That's why there's not people involved in Lehman Brothers and Deutsche Bank working at these banks. Like Joseph Gentile can't really have worked at Lehman Brothers and also at SVP. And Kim Olsen can't really have worked at Deutsche Bank and Signature. Otherwise, what Joe Biden's saying there would be a mad lie.
During the Obama-Biden administration, we put in place tough requirements on banks like Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank.
How did that work out?
Including the Dodd-Frank law.
Dodd-Frank law, that's that guy, Frank, who lobbied to change the law so that a bank he worked for and who gave him $1 million could benefit.
To make sure that the crisis we saw in 2008 would not happen again. Unfortunately,
it did happen again.
The last administration rolled back some of these requirements.
Oh, that last administration where people held fundraisers. Oh, that last administration that was voted for by both parties. Oh, that last administration that was a direct result of the failures of 2008. Joe Biden and elected and appointed officials all insist the emergency interventions to protect deposits in Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank, or indeed any further bank failures, won't come at taxpayers' expense. On Monday, Biden was at pains to say that no losses would be borne by taxpayers, and the money would come from the fees that banks pay into the Deposit Insurance Fund of the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, FDIC. His comments followed those of Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, who told CBS on Sunday, "Let me be clear that during the financial crisis, there were investors and owners of systemic large banks that were bailed out, and the reforms that have been put in place means that we're not going to do that again in the same way, in a way that's visible and plain, because we worked out that we can get away with this stuff if we just change the words a little bit. But one thing we can tell you is the financial industry isn't going to be meaningfully persecuted in the same way that Joe Biden's Big Pharma, We Beat Pharma This Year bill isn't going to meaningfully penalise him. Otherwise, you won't be seeing Pfizer coming on saying we've made record profits. What they'll do is they'll find a way of being able to say something to you, like, oh, we changed it, look, that won't make a meaningful difference, not to the profits of the pharmaceutical industry. We beat pharma this year! Jason Furman, chair of the Council of Economic Advisors under Barack Obama, was not convinced, saying, make no mistake, it does have an expected cost to taxpayers. Even Andrew Ross Sorkin, financial columnist for the New York Times, thinks it's a bailout. It's a bailout, not like 2008, but it's a bailout of the venture capital community and their portfolio companies, their investments. It's easy to see why the Biden administration is keen to avoid the B word, given the general antipathy towards the enormous bailouts that Wall Street banks received during the 2008 financial crisis. Generally speaking, it created a populist movement, notably Occupy, where people from across the political spectrum came together, recognizing that their interests, shared interests, meant they ought to put aside any cultural differences and come together to confront centralized power. Have you noticed that since then, there's a lot of talk about how we're all different from one another and how we should spend all our time fighting one another based on our cultural, sexual and identity differences? What a weird coincidence. Almost as if the culture is pumping you full of information to make you think, oh God, that person's got a different type of dicky bird than I got. And spend all your time worrying about stuff that doesn't really matter if you stop stop thinking about it. Finance officials have said that covering depositor losses from the bank failures would be met in part by the Deposit Insurance Fund held by the FDIC, the government corporation that supplies deposit insurance to depositors in the US commercial banks and saving banks. But Susanna Streeter, head of money and markets at Hargreaves Lansdowne, said the wider banking system will bear the brunt of the bailout of banking customers, as the money will come from fees institutions pay into the Deposit Insurance Fund. So this won't affect you unless you use money. I don't know, perhaps you don't use money in your life. I, of course, get through life just by, if I need a good or service, what I do is I sing them a song, and then I'll just get my money like that. So I'm not affected by banking stuff. If that happens, it will get harder to argue that the non-bailout bailout will not ultimately fall on US taxpayers. But they will keep arguing it, or they'll wait a little bit of time, like they did with the 2008 regulations, before rescinding them because you're thinking about something else. Because by then, there'll be a war or a pandemic. And we'll be thinking about that, and you'll forget, oh no, there was that thing, weren't they, where they lied to us again. Don't forget. Assuming there are wider losses not covered either by SVB and Signature Assets or Federal Deposit Insurance Funds, part of it should be expected to fall on bank customers indirectly, Morgan Ricks, a banking professor at Vanderbilt Law School, told NBC. Okay, so let's see if there is a relationship between the way that parties are funded and the way that parties behave when in office, and if Biden's serious when he spouts invective about how the perpetrators of these events will be punished. In 2020, President Trump promised 4 more years of low taxes, light regulation, and a laser focus on the stock market. Yet professionals on Wall Street shunned Trump and funneled staggering amounts of money to his opponent. Campaign donations to Biden were 5 times larger than to Trump. What this clearly demonstrates to me is that there is a porous relationship between Wall Street and Washington. That if you give enough money to the Democrat Party or the Republican Party, they will legislate, regulate, and govern in accordance with your wishes, not in accordance with the people that voted them into office and power. Biden received 5 times more money from Wall Street than Trump. Do you think that receiving this enormous injection of cash will impede his ability to regulate, guide, and influence the manner in which he regulates the financial industry? Or do you think he'll just take that money and forget all about it? The same way they took your vote, then forgot what they promised you. But that's just what I think. Let me know what you think in the comments and the chat. Turn on the notification bell right now so you know about these videos. We make them every single day. Watch the live stream show. It's lively, it's funny, great guests, lots of free speech on there. You're gonna love it. We're bringing people together from across the spectrum. We ain't been beaten down. We're waking right up, and we want you with us. Stay free. All right. The beginning bit of the pandemic, it was like really nice. It was about a month where it was like a free holiday, and I thought this is gonna be beautiful. That spirit didn't last that long, did it? You won't get addicted to that. You take it in a jungle. I'm not going to not get addicted to something just because there's a toucan nearby. You should not let your children look at screens. Now I've got them, I'm like, oh, stick Netflix on and give it a Rolo, will ya? That clip was from my new special, Brandemic, only available on Locals. You can buy the special for $20, or you can become a member of our community to get both the special and all my Locals content for 1 whole year.